Hello everybody, my name is Henry Lee, I'm a FIDE Master from Ireland, and in this installment of Tactical Thursdays, we will be looking at the theme of deflection. Now, what is deflection? Deflection is when an enemy piece or pawn is forced to leave its position, therefore stopping it from doing a very important task, like protecting another piece or protecting another square. We'll jump straight in with an example, and feel free to try and solve the position if you haven't seen it before. In this position, white played rook b2. So obviously white is in a lot of trouble here already, as you can see. A lot of the squares around the white king is very weak. So what do you think black should play? So I urge you to pause the video and try and find the best move for black. Okay, so the first example is relatively simple. The move here is straightforward, queen f3, attacking the white queen and threatening checkmate on g2. So white is in a very dire position. If white takes our queen, after rook a1 check, white can only block with the pieces on the back rank and we'll get checkmated very soon. And what if here white plays queen f1? Again, pause the video. There's another deflection tactic here. Okay, so I hope you found rook a1. It's also a pin, so there's not much white can do. If white takes our rook, queen g2 is checkmate. And anything else, we just take whatever white blocks with on the back rank, and very simple. Okay, let's move on to the next example. So in this position, it is black to move, and white is counting on the fact that if we go queen e1 check, white has not the move rook takes e1, which would get himself checkmated, but queen to f1, where white covers the back rank and is safe for the moment. Okay. So not queen e1. There's a very strong deflection move here. Pause the video and see if you can find a very strong move for black. Okay, so this one is a little trickier than the last example, but the move is the surprising rook takes a3. So this pawn is protected by 3 different pieces, so it might seem surprising that we can take this, but the tactics work in our favor here. Firstly, if pawn takes rook, then we can take the rook on a1 check, and whatever white plays, we're pretty much always going rook e1, and checkmate is unstoppable. For example, rook b1, rook e1 check, and after he takes and we take, let's just show that, checkmate will be delivered very shortly. So white cannot take with the b pawn. Similarly, white cannot take with the rook or the queen for back rank reasons. Once white takes with the queen on a3, then we can see the queen is deflected, so the theme of deflection, deflected away from the defense of the f1 square. So we can now go queen e1 check, and there is no queen f1 to stop checkmate, and white must take, and we'll get checkmated shortly. And the same thing happens after rook takes a3. Again, we go queen e1 check, and unfortunately after queen f1 there's no rook on a1 to support the queen, so we'll shortly get checkmated. Okay, let's move on to the next example. This one is kind of a classic example, fairly famous one. It's black to play, and pause the video and try and find the best move for black. Okay, so the best move is the nice aesthetic queen b2. Now, what does this move do? Well, basically we're threatening to take this rook on a1 in the corner for free. And unfortunately there's not much white can do, because if white takes our queen, then we see the deflection theme in action. The rook is deflected from defending its rook on a1, so we can take that one and white will be checkmated shortly. The same thing happens after rook takes a2. We take the rook on b1 and checkmate will follow, because the rook on a1 is now deflected from the defense of the rook on b1. And unfortunately there's not much else white can do. If white goes queen d1, defending everything, unfortunately the f2 square is now undefended, so we can checkmate white shortly here on g2. Okay, so this one is very nice. Queen b2, deflection. Let's move on to the next example. So this one is very aesthetic as well. Pause the video again, and it's black to play, and try and find the strongest continuation. Okay, so one way for black to end the game is actually relatively simple. He could just go rook e2. For example, king f1, queen e6, and this would be winning for black. However, there's an even nicer finish here, which I hope you saw. So it starts with the move rook e1 check. Now this may seem quite surprising because the queen is defending and the rook is defending the e1 square, so it seems like this is impossible and white can just take. However, here is where we throw in the intermediate move, queen d4 check. A very strong move. Again, it's deflection, deflecting the queen away from the e1 square. White has no choice but to take, and we simply take the rook, promote to queen, and at the same time checkmate. Note that we cannot reverse the move orders, starting with queen d4 check, because after queen takes d4, rook e1 check, white now unfortunately has to move king f2, where now white is the one winning, and we have messed up our move orders. So it's very important to pay attention to move orders when calculating combinations. Let's move on to the next example. This one is probably slightly more difficult than the other ones. It also features deflections, of course. So pause the video, see if you can find the strongest way to play for white. Okay, so the combination here starts with the move rook takes e5. Sacrificing an exchange. Black is obliged to take this, obviously. And here we have the excellent move queen takes e5. So this is deflection. We're basically deflecting the queen away from the defense of the king. Black must take. As a side puzzle, what if black plays bishop e7? Pause the video if you haven't seen this yet and try and find the way to finish black off here. Okay, so I hope you found bishop c6 check. Again, it's very strong deflection. If black takes, then we have checkmate on e7. And if black goes king f8, we have bishop h6, leading to checkmate. So black cannot go bishop e7 and must take our queen. Again, if you haven't seen the solution yet, pause the video here and try and find very strong deflection. Okay, so the move here is bishop c6 check. Very strong deflection. The only move here is rook takes c6, and now rook d8 is checkmate. So very nice puzzle. We first deflected the pawn, and then deflected the queen, and then deflected the rook, so that all the pieces now leave the d8 square unprotected, and we checkmate. So a very nice combination. Now we'll move on to the final two positions, which are maybe slightly harder, and therefore you should definitely try to solve these. Now, this is white to play, and here black's idea is that after rook h8 check, king d7, now if we take the rook on f7, black's idea is to take our rook on h8, where it's okay for black. And similarly, if we take the rook on c8, he will take our rook on g7, and he'll also be okay. However, black missed something, very strong deflection. So pause the video and try and find the strongest continuation here. Okay, did you find the move bishop c6 check? A very strong deflection. This bishop is immune to all the pieces, because if black takes the rook, the bishop with the rook, then he loses an exchange, because the rook is deflected away from attacking our rook. So we're okay here. And after bishop c6 check, if knight takes c6, now we can take the rook with check, because we have deflected the knight away from the defense of the king. Okay, and if king takes, we can take the rook with check. And again, this is deflection to a worse square, and we can proceed with taking the rook on f7 next, and just be an exchange up. Okay, but when you're calculating this variation, did you consider for black king e6 in this position? Because this is the best try. And now, unfortunately for us, all the rooks are defended. So again, if we take a rook, he will take our other rook, and should be okay there. Or even just recapture, because everything is defended. But here white has the very strong continuation, rook h6 check. The only move for black is rook f6. And pause the video and see if you can find another deflection. Okay, so bishop d7. A very strong bishop. first sacrificing itself on c6 and then on d7 for a deflection tactic. So the king must take, and we will take rook on f6 and be an exchange up. So, very nice. And let's move on to the final deflection. Again, I urge you to try and solve this. There are two parts to this final puzzle, actually. The first part is, if we just flip the board, White decided not to play rook a3 in this position, which would look like a very strong move because it seems like there's no way to stop checkmate. So the first puzzle is, what happens after rook a3? Why did White decide not to do this move? Pause the video and try and find the solution. Okay, so there's a very strong continuation for black, which wins the game here, which is bishop takes h2 check. Firstly, if king f1, queen e2 is checkmate. Okay, so the only move is king h1, and now the very strong move bishop g3 check. Discovered attack, and unfortunately this rook is cut off from blocking h3. So if knight h3, we can go rook d1 and checkmate white. So the only move here is king g1. Now, sort of a mini combination. Pause the video and see if you can find a checkmate for black. Okay, so queen h2 does not work because after king f1, the h1 square is covered by the knight. However, if you notice that the back rank is very weak, we can find the combination rook d1 check. Rook takes d1, and now queen takes d1, very strong. Now the rook is removed from defending the back rank, and we continue with checkmate. So that's very nice. Okay, so that means that after rook a3, white is lost. So white was very clever about this. White played rook h3 first, attacking the black queen. The black queen went to g5, and now in the game white played rook a3. And here is the second puzzle. Is black simply losing here? Because there is no bishop takes h2 anymore. So what happens in this position? Try and work it out, see what happens. This is the final puzzle, and it's very nice. Okay, so did you find the very nice deflection queen takes c1? Now, at the first glance, true, it solves the problem of us getting checkmated, but we sacrificed the queen, and it doesn't look like we have a follow-up. However, here we have a secondary deflection now. Bishop takes b2. A very strong move, deflecting the queen once again. The queen cannot take the bishop because we have a checkmate on e1. So, for example, it must play a move to stay on the back rank, like queen d1, but then we take the enemy rook, and white is in big trouble here, because the rooks will be very, very strong with the bishop. For example, bishop might come to c5, and we might double on the second, and white is in a lot of trouble, basically. Okay, so how did you do on these puzzles? I hope you found most or all of the solutions, but hopefully you would have improved on your deflection skills. Okay, so that's going to be about it for this video. Thank you for listening, and see you guys later.